So good morning, everyone. My name is Eloisa Quesada, and on behalf of the Organizing Committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English, Costa Rica, I want to welcome you to the first interactive webinar of day 3 of our 2021 online conference, Building a Community of Practice to Enhance and Transcend English Language Teaching and Learning. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker. Katherine Stannett is an author with over 20 years of experience. She is the co-author of several successful secondary series and has also written articles, songs, and raps for many popular EFL magazines. Most recently, she has written 2 levels of the new National Geographic Middle School 5-level series, Impact, and 1 level for the new National Geographic Primary 7-level series, Look. She has given presentations and run workshops in many countries around the world, including Poland, Kazakhstan, Portugal, Honduras, Brazil, Spain, and Slovenia, and also conducts webinars from her home office in the UK.
Hello, you're muted.
Sorry about that. Here we go. I'll read this again, okay? So, good morning, everyone. On behalf of the Organizing Committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English, I want to welcome you to the first interactive webinar of day 3 of our 2021 online conference, Building a Community of Practice to Enhance and Transcend English Language Teaching and Learning. It is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Katherine Stannett. Is an author with over 20 years of experience. She is the co-author of several successful secondary series, and she has also written articles, songs, and raps for many popular EFL magazines. Most recently, she has written 2 levels of the new National Geographic Middle School 5-level series, Impact, and 1 level of the new National Geographic Primary 7-level series, Look. She has given presentations and run workshops in many countries around the world, including Poland, Kazakhstan, Portugal, Honduras, Brazil, Spain, and Slovenia, and also conducts webinars from her home office in the UK. Here to speak to us today with the presentation, Teaching the Student, please welcome Katherine Stannett.
Hello, thank you so much for that introduction. Hi everyone. How nice, I can see you all. This is a treat. I wasn't expecting to see you all. Can you just, since I can see you on my video screen, which is really lovely, can you just give me a thumbs up to show that you can hear me nice and clearly? Perfect. Thank you so much. First of all, I just want to say I really appreciate you giving up your Saturday morning. Thank you. I know that free time is precious for teachers, and so I very much appreciate you taking the time to come and listen. And, you know, my main hope is just to give you some ideas that you can take away with you and bring into the classroom, whether that's the real classroom or the Zoom classroom on Monday. So I just really hope that I'm going to give you some practical tips and practical ideas. So let me share my screen with you now. Okay. So, and can you just tell me in the chat whether you can see the screen okay? Because I just don't want to carry on until I'm sure that everyone can see that. So if a couple of people can just say yes. Yep, perfect. Okay, good. Thank you very much. Right, so let's get started. My talk is called Teaching the Whole Student. And I'd like to start by asking you a question, and you can put your answer in the chat box. So what I want you to do is cast your mind back to when you first decided to become a teacher. What was your motivation? Why did you decide to pick teaching as a career? And I just want you to write maybe 1 or 2 words in the chat box, you know, just something like, I became a teacher because of the incredible salary. But whatever it was that made you think, I want to be a teacher. And once I've seen a few of those, I'll go on to tell you the results of some surveys. So loving to teach, the learning process, change, yeah, empathy for others, Ah, that's nice, because my pre-kinder teacher was lovely to me. Sharing knowledge, loving to teach, an opportunity to help. Yeah, empowering others, joy and happiness. Well, that's all so positive and wonderful. Thank you. Good. That's all really lovely to hear. So there have been various surveys done recently, not necessarily just amongst teachers of English, but amongst teachers in general. And I had a look at the results of some of them because I was interested to find out why people become teachers. And the results are interesting. Very few teachers, just as I've noticed in the chat box, very few teachers say they became teachers because of the long holidays. Very few people mention job security or the pension. So what do people mention? What they really mention is because I wanted to work with young people, and I've seen that in the chat box already. A lot of you have said that. They say because I wanted to contribute to society. They say because I love the subject. And the most commonly given reason for teachers wanting to become teachers, because I wanted to make a difference to children's lives, or young people's lives, or even adults' lives if you're teaching adults. But it's the fact that you feel that somewhere as a teacher, you can make a difference to people's lives. And I think that's fantastic. And just out of interest, I thought I'd just show you, this is the actual percentage results. And you can see that 93% of teachers either said they wanted to be teachers because they wanted to make a difference to their pupils' lives, or because they thought they'd be good at it. And the other reasons, again, 91% subject interest, making a difference to society, wanting to work with young people. So that is fantastic. It's amazing. That's what we go into teaching for. We're idealists, aren't we? We have dreams, and we really believe that we're going to make a difference to students' lives. So what happens? Well, the first thing that happens when you're teaching is that sometimes what your expectations are not quite the same as what the students' expectations are. So sure, you have students, some students who come into the classroom and they really, really want to learn the language and they're fired up for finding out everything they can. But there are other students who actually coming into the classroom and thinking, maybe if I sit at the back and keep really quiet, I can just have a little sleep and no one will notice. Or all I want to do is pass the exam. I'm not interested in anything else. I just need to get through the exam. Or maybe they think, I'm expecting my teacher to entertain me. You know, I don't want to do any work. I just want entertainment. So you have to deal with those as a teacher. You have to deal with all your different students and their expectations. And that kind of lands on your shoulders. And then what's the next thing that comes bouncing down? The expectations of students' parents. So very often parents may have a very different idea about what they expect their kids to learn from the idea that you have. Sometimes they want you to keep their kids out of their way and keep them quiet. Sometimes they're very focused on exams. It depends on the parents, but you may have some pressure from them and some feeling that, you know, they want what they want. So you have to bear that in mind as well. So that comes bouncing down on your shoulders. And then you're probably thinking about what your students are going to do next, and what qualifications might their employers expect them to have, and how can you ensure that your students are ready to go out into the world and ready to be good employees or be good workers. So that's another thing that you're bearing in mind when you're teaching students, particularly if you're teaching teenagers, but even younger children. You're thinking ahead, you're thinking about preparing them for the future. And that's all about wanting to make a difference to their lives as well. And on top of that, here comes something else. Our school's expectations. So the school that you're working for may have very specific expectations. They may want to achieve a certain exam results. They may want other things. They may want to have a very good record when it comes to communication skills, but your school will have a certain number of expectations. So there's that you have to deal with as well. So all these things are kind of coming tumbling down onto that dream of yours about making a difference to your students' lives. And then, of course, there are the government expectations as well. So you'll have syllabus requirements that might come down from the government. And sometimes, I mean, I can say certainly in the UK, I know that teachers feel the government isn't always entirely aware of what the situation's like in school. So they have certain expectations and they don't really line up with what you're dealing with in school. So you have to deal with that as well. And if that's not tough enough, just when you think I'm coping with all that and I can do it all and I'm teaching and my students are enjoying themselves and I'm making a difference, then what happened? A year ago, bam, lockdown. So it is tough, isn't it? It's a tough job. And like everyone else, we're more than a year into this and you're probably feeling a bit tired, a bit jaded, a bit like, oh, when am I going to see the end of this? It's tough for you, it's tough for your students, and I think it's really important that we all acknowledge that. You know, there's a very British attitude, which is sort of stiff upper lip. Come on, everyone, we're all doing fine, we're all coping. But sometimes I think you have to say, oh, you know, this is difficult, and I'm finding this difficult. My job, for me, I'm in my office at the end of my garden, and not much has changed, but I'm finding it tough. So I'm not going to offer any easy solutions to that. But what I do believe very strongly is there is a way we can pull some positivity out of this. So there's a way that we can continue to teach English and prepare our students for academic success, and at the same time focus on their overall well-being. So focus on the whole student. And that's really what my talk is about, so that we are really going back to that dream we had when we became teachers. We're making a difference to our students' lives. Now, in the last year or so, I've been working on an exam series for National Geographic. It's a new edition of an exam series called Close Up. And when we were first developing this a year and a half, 2 years ago, and we were all talking about it and talking about how we could make it different and how we could make it interesting, we started to talk about focusing on the whole student. And we felt very strongly that students, as I said before, students need to have an overall feeling of well-being to do well academically. And how can we try and support that in our book? So we started a special strand in the book called Live Well, Study Well, the idea that activities consolidate students' language, but also contribute towards their well-being. And so some of this talk, I'm going to share a couple of activities from that book, from that series of books. Mainly what I'm going to share with you are activities that I've written specially for today. And as I said earlier, I hope that they're going to be ones you can take into the classroom to help you work with developing the whole student and teaching the whole student. So what am I going to cover in today's talk? I'm going to look at 3 ways. So I'm going to talk about 9 things altogether. I'm going to talk about 3 ways to encourage positivity, 3 ways to develop our students' soft skills, and 3 ways to help our students deal with difficult situations. So all sorts of ways that we can really think about teaching the whole student. So let's start off with positivity, because that's really important and we're all trying hard to be positive. 3 ways to encourage positivity. So when I was preparing this talk, I did some surveys amongst my friends. I thought it'd be very interesting to find out what is keeping people going during these difficult times. What's really making them get out of bed in the morning and keep on going? So I asked 2 sets of people. I asked teachers and educators and people with whom I was working through social media. So I was trying to get a lot of people talking from different countries and different settings. And then I also talked to students. And I thought I'd just share with you what I found out. And this is not a very scientific survey, so I'm just going to show you in a kind of word cloud. This is the results of talking to all those teachers and educators. And I said, what makes you feel positive? And you can see the big words there are the things that have really, people have mentioned several times. So a lot of people talk about family. A lot of people talk about wine. A lot of people talk about their pets, particularly their dogs, books, flowers, sun, coffee, being with friends. So those are the kind of things that are keeping people going when times get tough, and they're really, really important. Now let's compare that with what the students said. So I have to be honest here and say that I was only talking to English students. I was basically talking to my kids' friends, and a wider group of children that I know and I teach in the UK. But it'll be interesting to see if you think this is similar in the countries that you come from. So what I thought was really interesting is students don't mention family at all. Okay, they don't mention family as something that keeps them going. And maybe that's because they're stuck with their family. And what they really do mention is connecting with friends. They mention a lot about exercise, going outside, going for walks, interacting with nature, fresh air. And they mention kind of creative things like doing craft activities, music, painting, yeah, things like that. So these are the kind of things that are keeping young people positive. So now what I want to do is I want to look at the way that we can harness that and try and keep our students positive and at the same time practice English. So let's have a look at some really simple ways. And the first way, which is what we've noticed here, you can see it says connecting with friends. So how can we encourage our students to stay connected? It was very surprising to me to find out from my own younger daughter, who's 15, now 16, that although she's a very sociable girl, she has lots of friends, she was not keeping connected with them during lockdown. And when I asked why, she said, the reason I'm not staying connected with my friends is because there's nothing to talk about, because everything's the same, nothing is changing, and what's the point? So I think as teachers, we can use that and we can create a framework. So we can find ways to get students talking to their friends, staying connected, which is a really good positive thing for them. So for example, we can say to students, okay, here's a job for you over the next 2-3 days. And you can do this in your first language. This doesn't have to be in English. Contact 3 friends or 3 family members and ask them to tell you an interesting fact about themselves, or ask them to think of 3 adjectives to describe you, or tell you about a time they felt scared or excited or proud, or tell you what their last meal would be, or describe a friend of theirs whom you've never met, or tell you about a time they've made a mistake. So you're just giving them the prompts and saying, right, I need you to go and find this out. Contact 3 people and find that out. And then, of course, what they do is they come back into the classroom, whether that's an online classroom or a real classroom. And this is where they're using their English, because now they're reporting back and they're telling you what they found out. So then they're using their English and saying, I spoke to this person and they said this. So it's a very simple way, and it's a very easy to use way of getting your students to continue keeping up that contact with their friends and their families, which I think is so important. So that's the first idea. Now, another thing we noticed in the positivity cloud was get outside. And this is massively important for mental health, for general well-being. And, you know, I know for myself, I have to go outside every day because I have 2 very, very big, energetic dogs. And if I don't take them out every day, they're a nightmare to live with. But sometimes, particularly if you're not feeling too great, it can be difficult to make yourself go out of the house. And I think it's really important. And I think any kind of interaction with nature, even if it's just for 10-15 minutes a day, can make a massive difference to your feeling of well-being. So how can we get our students to do that? Well, I'm going to make an assumption that they probably have access to a phone with a camera. If they don't, tell them to take a sketchbook outside. But I think most young people today do. Just say, go outside, and even for the ones at the lowest level of English, take a picture for every color of the rainbow. So what can you find that's green or blue or yellow or orange? Then bring that photo back into the next classroom, share the photos, and see if your partner or the other students can name the colors. And for students who are at a slightly higher level, go outside and take a picture for every letter of the alphabet. I mean, or you can divide them into groups. So you can say, okay, group 1, I want you to take pictures for the letters A through to D, and group 2, E through to H, or whatever it is. But the idea is they take pictures of things that they see for letters of the alphabet, and again, they bring them back into the classroom, and then you can see if other people can name them. So it's a fantastic way of seeing what vocabulary your students have, getting them to increase their vocabulary, but also just getting them to go outside and look at things and interact with things. And for your more advanced students, for maybe students who are sort of first certificate level, who are like a B2 plus or a C1, maybe you can get to do some work on colloquial phrases. So you can give them phrases like every cloud has a silver lining, and see if they can take some pictures to represent that. And then again, bring them back into the class so that other students can guess what they mean. So that's 2 ways that I've talked about to try and keep those positive things going in the classroom. And that is to stay connected, so give your students a framework, and to go outside. So the next one in my first 3 section is creating. So creating is massively important. Actually, it's a really important soft skill that your students need anyway. And in terms of making one feel more positive, getting involved in something and being creative is really, really important. And in fact, this is one of the pages that I talked about. We talk about it here. So there's an American Hungarian psychologist who's called Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, I think. I did look up how to pronounce that. Anyway, he's done a lot of interesting research, and he's found out that people are happier when they're busy, as long as they're doing something challenging, which I'm sure you know. You know what it's like when time passes really slowly because you're bored. And then there are other times when you're really engaged in something and you're completely involved in it. And he invented the term flow, and that's when you sort of forget about time. Time passes really quickly. And it's that pleasant experience of having enough interesting things to do that you don't notice time passing. So what can we do with our students to get them creative? Writing a story is always fun, but why not make it a bit more challenging by just making it slightly off the wall? So give them 3 completely unconnected words like piano, tree, banana, and say, write a story, but you've got to get those words in. Or you could show them 3 pictures. But the idea is that it's a little bit of a challenge because it's not quite what they're expecting. Or another thing that a lot of students have found, and I don't know if you found this where you are, but certainly here, when we first went into lockdown, all of a sudden, all the baking ingredients disappeared off the shelves in the supermarkets. Like suddenly you couldn't get flour, you couldn't get yeast, you couldn't get caster sugar, everything just disappeared because everyone had decided they were going to go home and bake like crazy. And baking and preparing food is a lovely way of sharing time with your family and being creative. So why not get your students doing that? So for example, you can challenge them to find a healthy recipe in English, which uses, say, a cabbage, a pepper, and some cheese. So focus on that healthy eating, and then change some of the ingredients, make your own version, write your recipe, take a photograph, and explain why it's healthy. So it's a really nice way of getting them to do something creative, something away from their screens, but then they come back into the classroom and they've produced something, they've produced their recipe and their photograph, and they can tell you about why it's healthy. Or another creative activity is drawing a picture. Draw a picture of something you love, a person, a pet, a possession of you, and write a few short sentences to say why you love it. So just some different ways of getting your students to be creative. All right, so we have looked at 3 ways to add positivity to the classroom. We talked about staying connected, getting outside, and going with the flow, being creative. So let's move on to my next section. and I talked about soft skills. So soft skills, it's almost impossible to say. Soft skills are increasingly mentioned by employers as things that young people often lack when they go into the workplace. So you may have young people joining the workplace who have very good qualifications on paper, but actually not terribly good at doing things like working in teams or thinking critically. So it's really important when we're talking about teaching the whole student that we try to do some work on students' soft skills. So let's look at the first of these, and that is teamwork. So teamwork is a very important soft skill. It's one that I personally am very bad at, I have to admit. And I think that's because for the last 20 years, I've just been working by myself in my office. So I'm pretty hopeless at working in teams, but it is a really, really useful, important skill. So how can we get our students to try and develop that? I'm just going to show you how we do that in the book that I talked about, which will also give you some ideas for you to use in the classroom. So first of all, you can present the idea of how to work in a team. So explain to students what that means, the different important parts of working in a team, that you need to respect other people, you need to be reliable, you need to do your share, support others, listen to them, and communicate your ideas. And then once you've done that and you've realized what teamwork is all about, we then move on to look at some strategies. So a very important strategy when you're working in a team is really to have confidence in yourself. And in fact, there are two reasons for this. One is if you have confidence in yourself, you'll be able to speak out and not feel like you know, everyone else is more important than you and you can't say anything. But also, if you're properly confident in yourself, you will give other people a chance to speak. And you very often find that the people who tend to dominate group activities are not actually the ones that are the most confident. They're the ones that they feel they need to prove the most. So having confidence in yourself is really important in terms of being a team member. And you have to remember that everybody's important in a team and everybody has something that's worth saying. So these are just some tips about why it's important to have confidence in yourself. And it's about understanding your own skills, finding your strength, and doing things that you know you can do well. And then finally, you want to get that into some kind of project work. So here are some couple of fantastic projects that will help students develop their teamwork skills. So the first one I'm sure you'll be very familiar with because it's a classic English language communication activity and it always works really well. It's the Desert Island project where you have to, in your team, decide on the most and least important objects to take with you onto a desert island. And that really needs some teamwork while you all discuss them and decide what's important and agree on the order. And another possible project that you can do is to think about raising money for a group in your community. How can you do that? Make a plan of action. So you think about what each team member, what the kind of tasks that they can do and how to divide them up so that everyone's happy. So that's the first of my 3 ways to develop soft skills, looking at teamwork. Now, the next really important soft skill is resilience. And there's a little video for you here, which sums up why I think, well, actually, to me, it sums up what we've all been thinking over the last year. Let's see if you agree.
Hey, Mr. Grumpy Gills. When life gets you down, you know what you gotta do?
I don't want to know what you got to do.
Just keep swimming, just keep swimming, just keep swimming, swimming, swimming. What do? We swim, swim.
Dory, no singing.
Oh,
Dory.
I love to swim in.
Dory.
When you want to swim, you want
See,
to
I'm going to get stuck now with that song. Now it's in my head.
Sorry.
So resilience. And I think sometimes the last year has felt a bit like that, where it's just like, just keep swimming, just keep on going. We're going to get through this. But it's a really important skill for your students, massively important. So how can we help them to develop that skill, that soft skill of resilience? So these are a couple of things you can do. And one you can do just working with students individually, and one you can do with students working in groups. So what I would say is that if you're going to go with the first of those on my slide, the working individually, you need to be very sure that your students are going to be okay with it, because what we're doing is we're asking them to write down specific problems that they might have, and then thinking about a list of small steps they can take to deal with it, deciding on a small reward for themselves for every step they take, and then sharing that idea with the class. But some students just may not be happy, even if it's anonymous. They may not want to talk about their problems with the whole class, and that's completely fine. So if you feel that's inappropriate for your class, then go for the group work activity. So the group work activity is where you would brainstorm a general list of problems with a class. And it doesn't have to be English language problems. It can be any problems. It can be something like, I don't feel I'm getting enough exercise, or I'm starting to feel really anxious every time I leave the house, or whatever it is. So you brainstorm a list of general problems, and then you put the class into groups and you give them one problem per group. And then again, you talk about this technique that you can use, which is all about breaking that problem up into small steps so that it doesn't seem so overwhelming. So instead of, oh my goodness, I've got this huge problem I have to deal with, instead you're just thinking, well, I'm just going to deal with this little step. And when I've dealt with this little step, I'm going to give myself a treat. And then there's another little step. So that's something that in groups, students can discuss, think about the small steps and the rewards, and then they can swap their problems and comment on each other's ideas. And it's just a really nice way of getting your students to understand how they can develop a bit of resilience when things are tough and when they have problems to deal with. So we've talked about teamwork and we've talked about resilience. So let's look at our third section here, which is critical thinking. So I'm sure that you will all be very aware of critical thinking, because it was one of those things that's always mentioned alongside of 21st century skills. And it's been a bit of a buzzword over the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years. And I think sometimes people fall into the trap of thinking critical thinking is really only relevant for the sort of higher level students, which I don't agree with at all. I think we all can be critical thinkers from a very, very young age. And it's really about asking the right questions. So the first thing I want to talk about is critical thinking in terms of analysing stories, news stories that are out there. And I think this is incredibly relevant for the year that we've had, because it's very easy to panic. It's very easy to pick up false information, particularly when you get your news from maybe social media or other sources, or, you know, my friend said that her friend said that his friend said that. So you have to learn how to ask the right questions. So I just put together some questions that you should try and encourage your students to ask every time they see an online news article, which is, where does it come from? So think about the source. Who wrote it? Who wrote it? What is it actually saying? So what's the actual message that this article is trying to say? How did it get this information? Why is it giving this information? And when was it published? And if you can get your students to get into the habit of asking those 6 questions, they will become much better critical thinkers. Rather than just accepting what they see, they just stop and ask those questions each time, because they can really give you a clue as to how trustworthy the information is. Now, there are some really great online resources that your students can use to practice that. So I've put some links there, and you know that these slides will be available for you after this talk, so you can come back to this and copy down these links. But these are basically some games that students can play, where they will read articles and try and guess if they're true or false. And they have to use their critical thinking skills to assess them. So there are some very good fake news quizzes on BuzzFeed, for example, and those other two sites. And I would just say, if you're going to use these in the classroom, particularly if you have younger learners, obviously check them out first, because some of them are not appropriate for younger learners. So you'll just want to take some time and make sure they're right for your class. But there's some very interesting ones. And what I didn't put down there, but is definitely worth looking at, is also BBC. So if you put something like BBC fake news quizzes into Google, you can come up with some really nice fun activities for students to do, where they practice using their critical thinking skills. So that is for more advanced students, I would say. All of this, we're talking about students who are at a fairly good level of English, where they'll be reading news articles in English online. Although, having said that, those skills are useful whatever language you're using. But how can we get students who are younger to use their critical thinking skills? Well, I absolutely love to use photographs. And one of the great things about working with National Geographic Learning is that we have access to amazing and inspiring photographs. So it's always a fun way to get kids or young people or older people interested and asking questions. So let's have a look at this. And this is going to be a challenge for you. So I want to see some ideas in the chat box. Let's have a look at this photo. And I want you to think about, where do you think it is? So which country is it? What are the children doing? And why are they carrying a flamingo? Oh, and do you think it's a real flamingo? So if you have any ideas, can you type them into the box? So I want you to use your critical thinking skills, which means you're looking at that photograph and you're looking at all the clues you might get from that photograph that will give you some ideas. Someone said the Dominican Republic. Okay. Yeah. Oh, so it could be a show and tell activity. It could be the Bahamas. Yeah. Any other ideas? Somewhere in Africa, on an island in Latin America, Florida, Jamaica. Wow, we're traveling around. This is great. Any more ideas for countries, places, or what they're actually doing? Why are they carrying? So you think it's a pet? Caribbean island. Okay. And someone thinks the flamingo is not real. It's a decoration. Very good. Okay. All right. So shall I give you the answer now? So this is, it is a real flamingo. This is a flamingo called Flamingo Bob. He even has a name. And this is on a Dutch Caribbean island called Curacao or Curacao. So this is a flamingo that was rescued. He flew into a hotel window, knocked himself out. And fortunately, the lady who was staying in the hotel at the time, it's called Odette Durst, and she was a bit of a wildlife expert. She had a look at this poor flamingo who'd managed to knock himself out. And she realized that he had already been injured due to plastic pollution in the sea. So the pollution in the sea had injured him and he could not be released back into the wild. So she looked after him, she took him in, and now she uses him to educate children about the importance of keeping our oceans clean of plastic and generally keeping plastic out of, not littering the environment with plastic. So she goes and visits schools and she tells them the story of Flamingo Bob and how he can never again live in the wild. And that's her way of kind of being an ambassador for the environment, or rather making Flamingo Bob into an ambassador for the environment. So it's a really nice little story. And then what you can do, another way that you can continue with your critical thinking, is you can then ask students to think about what other animals could be used in schools to teach children about life outside school. So there are other questions that you can ask students. So just something like this picture is a really nice way to get students to think critically. First of all, by using the clues that they see in the picture, and then by expanding it to getting them to think about how the bird's used to teach children to people to change their habits, or as I say, what other animals could be used in schools to teach children about life outside school. Okay, so just to recap, we talked about 3 ways to add positivity to the classroom, and we've talked about 3 ways to develop our students' soft skills. There's teamwork, resilience, and critical thinking. So now I'm going to move on to the 3rd part of this talk, which is about dealing with difficult situations and negative thoughts. And again, this is, as I said, this talk is called Teaching the Whole Student. And it is really important that as teachers, we try and help students to deal with those difficult situations and negative thoughts. And don't forget that the better able they are to deal with difficult situations, the more ready they will be to learn. And that's why it really benefits all of us to teach the whole student, so that they can live well and study well. So now this is a technique that I use myself, and it's a meditation technique, which I call Find Your Happy Place. And I find it personally, I find it very useful on those days when, and I'm sure you will recognize this, some days when you just cannot stop your brain going on and on about things that are going to make you panic. Oh my goodness, I've got so much work to do. Or, oh, what am I going to do? I haven't done this. Or how am I going to pay this bill? Those thoughts that just keep going on and on and on in your head, and you need to be able to stop them. And so what I like to do is I think of a place that makes me happy. And I close my eyes and I picture it. And it's a place, because it's a place in my head, in my brain, I have total control over it. I can visit it whenever I feel anxious or sad or panicked or worried. I can go to this place. And the most important thing, and this is what you need to get your students to do, is to really focus on absolutely seeing that in their mind. So you've got to get them to think about, what does the ground feel like under your feet? You know, what can you see? What can you smell? What can you hear? What can you touch? Are you alone or are you with other people? If you turn your head, what do you see to that side? If you turn your head, what do you see to that side? So you're getting them completely focused in on this place. And of course, that is a wonderful way to encourage students to focus on their vocabulary as well, because you're getting them to think about all that vocabulary for things they can see and touch and smell and hear. They're thinking about vocabulary for things like furniture, or if their happy place is outside, they're going to be thinking about all the vocabulary for maybe the sea or the sand or the trees or the mountains or the snow or the wind. So it's a great way to work on vocabulary, but it's also a really nice technique to give your students, a meditation technique, which they can use at any point. When they're beginning to feel overwhelmed, just close your eyes and go back to your happy place. So yeah, I think it's very useful. So that's one way that you can help your students deal with negative situations. So the next one is about screen time. So screen time, how to use it well, when to switch it off. I think it's a terrible mistake to have a very negative view of screen time. And I know from my own daughters that nothing makes them roll their eyes more than when I start saying things like, do you have to look at your screens the whole time? And they point out to me, and they're absolutely right, that there are tons of really good educational fun things you can do with screens. And as teachers, we will know that anyway. And my goodness, we've had to use them a lot over the last year. So there are lots of positive things about using screens. I'm going to share some of the things I've found recently, and I'm sure that you will already know some of these. And that at the end of this talk, we're going to have a look at another one, actually. So there are quizzes that you can make with Quizlet or Kahoot. And it's really nice to get students to make up their own quizzes and then share them with their classmates. There are lovely post-it note apps like Padlet. So that's almost like having a sort of school notice board where everyone can share their ideas. And that's a great one that you can use for brainstorming ideas or brainstorming vocabulary, finding out what words your students already know. You saw the word cloud that I made at the beginning of this talk, which is a word cloud for positivity. So that's another thing you can do. You can create those word clouds. I think that was called, I think it might have been called just word cloud. I can't actually remember what the app was called that I used for that. But you can create word clouds and charts, and Mentimeter, which is what we're going to be going on and using, let's hope it works later, is another great way to get live feedback from your students. So we'll be seeing how that works if you don't already know it. So there are all sorts of wonderful ways to use screens effectively. And I think it's really important that we try not to be too negative about people using their screens, because that's what life's like. And they've helped us out a lot over the last year. But having said all that, it's also really important to give our students an opportunity to switch off their screens and do something else. And there are ways that we can get them to practice English. So oh, thank you. Yes, that's right. Wordart.com was the very one I was thinking of. Thank you. So, for example, well, we talked at the beginning of this talk about getting outside, and all those ideas are a great way to get students to switch off their screens. So another nice thing that you can get students to do, I don't know if you've come across a PE teacher, a physical education teacher called Joe Wicks. He was absolutely viral, certainly during the first lockdown. So he went on YouTube and he did a workout with kids, or for kids, every single morning. He had hundreds of thousands of people watching him and working out with him every morning, because he made it fun and it was all a bit silly. And sometimes he'd sometimes he'd be dressed as Superman or dressed as a bear or something like that. But that got me thinking, well, that's a nice thing that kids can do, or young people or students can do, which is create your own workout routine. And then you film it and do the instructions in English. So it's a great way of practicing your action verbs. It's a great way of practicing parts of the body, practicing the imperative. So you create your own workout routine completely away from the screen. And once you've worked it out and you've worked out your script, you can then film it and give your English instructions, and then you can share it. So that's one way of getting your students to move away from the screen. So another thing, and this is something, again, I discovered to my amazement not that long ago, was that my 15-year-old, at the time 15-year-old daughter, didn't know where to put a stamp on an envelope, because they don't send letters anymore. They send emails or texts or Snapchat or WhatsApp. And she literally didn't know, like, does it go there or does it go there? She didn't have a clue. So I thought, well, it would be quite fun for students to write a real postcard and send it. And I just imagine they're on the most amazing holiday of their lives. And you can ask them to send the postcard to you if you're okay sharing your address. But if you don't want to share your address, then they can send the postcard to the school. Or you can just ask them to send a postcard to someone in their family and amaze that person in their family with their use of English. But it's the simplest idea, and it's actually quite nice to get students away from using their screens, just putting their heads somewhere else and getting an actual card or a piece of paper and writing a message on it, and then put a stamp in the correct place on your postcard and take it to a post box and stick it in the post box. And yeah, someone's mentioned pen pals, which is fantastic as well. Really, really good. And then finally, drawing. So one way that you can get your students to move away from their screens is to ask them to draw a diagram of their own house or their dream house and label it. But there are all sorts of different drawing activities you can give students. You know, and I always hesitate a bit when I talk about drawing, because I'm so absolutely awful at drawing myself. And I remember when I was a student, I always used to find it very humiliating when we had to do drawing tasks, because no one could work out what on earth my drawings were supposed to represent. But if you try and focus on the labeling, then you're still getting them to practice lots of English, and the labeling is actually more important than the artistic skill. So there we are. That is about managing screen time. So dealing with difficult situations, we've talked about finding your happy place, managing your screen time. So the very last section is called Take Ownership. you can make a difference. Now, this is, in a way, it links back to what I was talking about, resilience. And it's when your students just feel a bit overwhelmed by all of the nasty stuff that's happened recently. Maybe they feel overwhelmed by climate change or by, you know, those kind of huge things that just seem too much to cope with. But you can encourage your students to take ownership and make a difference in a really small way. So, for example, talking about climate change, you can just start with little things like suggesting eat less meat, change the way you travel, use less plastic, or become a volunteer. So there are just little things that you can do. And then, as I mentioned before with these pages, we then talk about the techniques, the strategies that you need in order to do that. So it's achieving change is all about starting with a small goal and making sure that it's something you can really do. So no, you know, you're not going to be able to cope with all the pollution that's happening in the world. And that's really depressing and awful. But maybe you can cope with the pollution that's happening in your local park if you get together with some other people and you start to take small actions to just make that park look a little bit better, or the street that your house is in, or the area around your school. So it's talking about small goals, talking to friends and relatives and sharing your goals so that you've got people checking up on you. And then trying to stay positive and not giving up if you have a bad day. So that's really important. It's a bit like, you know, exercise or diet or something like that. You might have that one day when you don't do any exercise or eat a big piece of chocolate cake, but it doesn't mean you've completely failed. You just had a bad day and then you continue the next day. So it's all about the small steps. Okay. And then we can give the students some projects where they practice that taking ownership. So for example, they talk about how they can encourage their friends to change their habits to help the environment, or make a poster that gives people some tips for changing their habits to help the environment. All right, so we've got through our first hour and I'm keeping an eye on the time because I know we're going to go into breakout rooms in a minute. So I just wanted to recap for you what I talked about today. So we looked at 3 main big topics, which were encouraging positivity, developing soft skills, and dealing with situations. And then we looked within that at 3 activities for each of those things. So now it's going to be time for you to do some work because you're going to be going into breakout rooms. So I'm going to give you a task to do. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the task here on the slide. And then also, I think one of my colleagues is very kindly going to share a link to a Google document. And you can access that Google document, which will also give you the task. So you can look at that in your breakout rooms. So here's the task. Let's have a look at it. We've got a really interesting photograph, and you can read some background information about what the photograph shows and what it means. And in your breakout rooms, I want you to discuss with the other teachers in your breakout rooms some activities that you could develop around this photograph. And I want you to think about ways that you can use the photograph to develop critical thinking skills, or to encourage students to be creative, or get your students to do a task away from their screens. Now, you don't have to cover all of them. You can just do one of them, or you can do all of them if you want to. So, but I want you to think of at least one activity to do that falls within those 3 categories. And then you're going to summarize your ideas. Just use a sentence to summarize the kind of activities you've thought about. And then you're going to visit this website, and you will see a link to that on the Google document that's now been posted for you in the chat box. And you type in your ideas. And then what I'm hoping is, magically, we will see all your ideas when you come back together again. We'll see all your ideas come up on the screen and we can share our ideas together. Okay, so I hope that's clear what you have to do. The first thing I want you to do is just go and open that Google document and make sure that you can all see it, and then you should all be able to refer to it in your breakout rooms. And I think I'm going to hand over now to Henry. Are you going to set up the breakout rooms? Is that right?
Yes.
So now as you are moved to the breakout rooms, let's have in mind that this is a collaborative activity. So try, if at all possible, to turn on your cameras so you're not interacting with black boxes. It's better to have people to look at. So if it's possible for you, please turn on your camera. While you're not speaking, please mute your microphone so that we can avoid background noise, and try and follow, please, the conference etiquette rules. So Dandri will do the magic and move you to your breakout rooms.
Okay, so we will be going to breakout rooms in 3, 2, 1.
Here we go. All right. So I'm hoping, can you see my screen? Yeah, yeah, excellent. So I'm hoping that here you can see some of the ideas that you've come up with just coming up on my Mentimeter screen. So many nice ideas. And what I'd like you to do afterwards is perhaps on that Google document, if you look at the second page, you can also write some of your ideas in the second page, and then you can share them with everyone. But there's some lovely ideas here. So asking questions about the picture, allowing reflection time. Yeah, looking at the relationship between nature and human beings. I think that's really good, and I think that's definitely something to talk about in that picture. Also consider the why the situation happened. Yeah, so then you can get students maybe wondering, why are we needing to protect the pandas? Or you can get students to maybe produce infographics about animals commonly seen in our country, get involved in projects to raise awareness. Watch a movie related to the topic as a pre-task activity. That's very nice. And in fact, the photographer who took this photograph, Amy Vitale, you can find some great videos of hers on YouTube. So check them out, really nice. And she speaks very nicely and slowly and clearly as well. And she talks about the photos that she took. So that would be a very nice pre-task activity. Encourage decision-making related to the image. Ask students what would they do, decide, for example, all the proposals, and then select the best. Yeah, ask the students to discuss if the suit works. Ask them to say what they think about the picture, or dress like their pets. Brilliant. Yeah. Put students in breakout rooms. Elicit questions on the photo and reactions. Imagine a world turned around with pandas protecting humans. So that's interesting. So yeah, so many really lovely ideas here. Let's have a look at a few more. So looking at how we get animals ready to go back into their habitats. Provide clear guidelines. What else have we got? Consider the impact of humans on the environment and have a debate. And some critical thinking, encourage them to make questions about what they see in the picture. How does it make them feel? Wonderful. Okay, so good. Let's just look at them for a little bit longer. Some really fantastic ideas here. So thank you so much. Make a brainstorming about which animals need similar care in Costa Rica because they're in the endangered species. Yeah. And incorporate different points of view. So I don't know if there's a way that you're going to be able to continue to see these, but I think you've come up with some really wonderful ideas, and I hope that's been helpful. And if you get the chance, check out some more of Amy Vitale's work. She's an amazing photographer, and she's done some really interesting stuff with other animals as well. And I think I gave you a link on that Google document where you can read a whole article about her experience photographing pandas, which was so interesting. And she got very involved with the conservation center in Woolong. So that was all really good. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing that now. Thank you so much for all those ideas. Okay, and I'm just going to go back to the very end of my talk. Can you
Yes.
now see it? Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I just want to finish off by saying, if you remember at the beginning of the talk, I mentioned that the vast majority of teachers, when they were asked, said that the reason they decided to become a teacher was because they wanted to make a difference to their students' lives. And I really believe that when we focus on the whole student, we can make a difference, despite all those pressures and problems we talked about, despite lockdown, despite the students' parents or the school or the government changing the syllabus, all those things that we have to deal with. When we really focus on the whole student, then we do make a difference to their lives, and we can actually also help them to achieve more academically. And the reason for that is that when students live well, they study well. And when they are emotionally stable, happy and positive, they learn better. And ultimately, when we prepare students for life, we're preparing them for success, both inside and outside the classroom. So we can make a difference to our students' lives. We all can. And I really hope that today's talk has given you some more ideas and just things that you can practically take straight into the classroom and use tomorrow. Or not tomorrow because it's Sunday, but Monday. And I think we've got about 7 or 8 minutes left for any questions. If anyone has any questions, and I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay, so if you have any questions, maybe you want to write them in the chat box, or if you want to come off mute and ask your question, no problem with that.
Yes, so someone has given a link just a bit further up in the chat box to Amy Vitale's own website, where you can find lots of stuff about pandas there. And on the Google document that I shared, there's a link to the, thank you very much, there's a link to the article from which I got the photograph. Someone saying, how can you manage your stress effectively? Well, I hope that I've given some ideas, because all of those, the ideas that I suggested, a lot of them are relevant, I think, for teachers as well as students. So for yourselves, as much as for students, doing things like getting outside, doing something creative, keeping in touch with friends, finding your happy place, all of those things can really help you to manage your stress effectively. And someone has asked how we can stimulate critical thinking. So I think photographs is a great way to go. If you can find some interesting photographs. And someone's asked where we can find more of those images. And I'm going to have to say, have a look at some National Geographic learning course books, because they are full of amazing, wonderful images, but also just go to the National Geographic website. You can subscribe to National Geographic on Facebook or on social media, and you get amazing videos and photographs that come up all the time. So that's a really good way of finding those good things. And I would just say, which I'm sure you do anyway, the more you read for your own pleasure, articles and magazines and newspapers, I don't know about you, but everything I read, there's a little part of my brain going, oh, I wonder if I can use this in the next class I'm teaching or in the next book I'm writing. And I have lists and lists of links to things. So if you get into the habit of that, you'll build up your own resources. Someone wanted to see my last slide again. So I think that's going to be available, isn't it, though, as a PDF? So I'm not sure that I can share that again right now, because I've closed my slideshow. Yes, reading for pleasure works for us and for the students as well. Okay. Are there any more questions at all?
Someone here's asking, how can we enhance resilience in our classrooms?
Yes. So I would say this idea of breaking things up into small steps. Yeah, it's about trying to let students realize that things shouldn't become too overwhelming, and that they can just take small actions is really helpful to get students to become more resilient. But also, you know, praise. I know it sounds very corny, but particularly at the moment when things are really tough, I think to just try and be as positive as possible, even if you don't feel it, and to give your students plenty of praise and to build them up so that they feel confident about themselves is enormously helpful. And as I think I've mentioned before, when I was talking about teamwork, you know, sometimes there are students who will seem to be too confident and too sure of themselves and often try and take over the classroom, but that's often an indication of actual lack of confidence.
Awesome.
Es una injusticia.
So we've got a little
Awesome.
bit of noise there. Don't know where that's come from.
Henry, can we please mute?
Okay, there we go. There was a question here, more of a like a suggestion. It says,
There's un momento.
would you please suggest the whole redesign of curricula in order to enhance critical thinking and soft skills among students in the educational system? It's something that's probably hard to do, but I think teachers can start that movement.
Yeah, absolutely. And there are ways that you can, you know, when you ask students to do things like reading comprehension exercises, they are using their critical thinking skills anyway. So I think a lot of the activities that you already do in the English language classroom are critical thinking, but maybe they're not labeled like that. But actually, I think when we teach language, we're asking our students to think critically all the time. You know, even when you ask them to predict, look at the title of this reading passage and predict what it's going to be about. They're using their critical thinking skills. Look at this photograph and think what it's about. They're using their critical thinking skills. So maybe rather than having to completely redesign the syllabus, it's actually a matter of identifying what's already there that is doing that job.
There's a question here, how to engage adult students in critical thinking when they have limited background on most topics or lack of interest.
Well, that is difficult, and particularly when it comes to lack of interest, because I would say, you know, one of the key things when you're teaching is to have your students motivated, and if they're not interested, then that's really tough. But you know, as I said, we can even little kids use critical thinking. As soon as you start asking the question why, you're thinking critically. And so I think that it doesn't matter if you don't know much about a topic, you just encourage your students to ask that question why and to find out more. You don't need to know loads about something to have an inquiring mind. So it's just trying to get that interest going. That's why I love using photographs, really, because I find them very, very effective in getting people interested. If you say, well, today we're going to talk about endangered species, you might find your class thinks, oh, not again, you know, we've done endangered species. But if you show them a photo like that one of the guy holding the panda, that immediately gets them interested and they want to know what's happening. So photographs are a great way to get people who maybe know nothing about a subject interested.
I guess there aren't any more questions. So on behalf of the organizing committee of the National Conference for Teachers of English, Costa Rica, I want to thank Katherine Stannett for her presentation today and her willingness to share her time and contribute to the success of our online event. So let's give her a warm round of applause.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Very valuable.
Thank you so much.
It was awesome. Thank you.
Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you
Love
for
your
contributing.
presentation. Wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.